Thank you.
Well, one, thank you all. The testimony was great that you presented, as well as the testimony today. Secretary Reich, you'll be surprised to know I agree with you. I think the majority of economic benefits in this recovery has accumulated to the wealthy, and it is by government's design that that's occurred. The stimulus wasn't aimed at infrastructure, certainly not job skills. It didn't stimulate new job creation along Main Street. It was focused at bailing out state governments and other areas. The Federal Reserve has pumped trillions of dollars toward Wall Street. Wall Street's roaring. Good for them. Middle-class families, Main Street, not so much. Just consider this. Wall Street's index value has almost doubled in this economic recovery. But Main Street, middle-class families, their incomes have barely budged. Think about this. In this terribly weak recovery, historically weak, the worst, frankly, in the last half century, if it would have just been average, just C grade, just nothing much to speak of, every family of four in America would have $12,000 more in their pocket today than they do. $12,000 more to pay utilities, $12,000 more to shop at that local businesses, $12,000 more to pay down student debt or avoid it in the first place. So I lay much of the blame and responsibility for middle class struggling with this government, and the President shares some of the responsibility, much of that, for that. I think the problem is joblessness. And I don't think income inequality is dragging down the economy. I think this weak economy is dragging down income equality. People just aren't finding good paying jobs. Certainly this Congress and White House aren't focused on that. And I think that is where our greatest effort needs to be, getting Washington out of the way to allow our small businesses to grow. Washington Post blogger and columnist Ezra Klein, I know he argues inequality is not the defining issue of our time. Instead, he says joblessness is. The fact so many million Americans have given up, or many more are stuck in jobs and underemployed. So I guess Dr. Winship, Dr. Mathur, to begin, why isn't joblessness? Why isn't this poor recovery really the focus of why we should be here today? Dr. Winship?
Thanks for the question. So I think what the administration has done that's been unproductive has been to frame everything in this inequality frame. And I think, with all respect, the Secretary does that as well. All of the ills of the economy are sort of laid to rest at things that progressives like that have worsened over time. But the bottom line is that if we could get back to the 1950s and 60s, it's pretty clear what we need. We need the productivity growth that we had back then. We never saw it before that. We've never seen it since. It's hard to imagine a story where inequality is the main factor behind that. And the best thing that we could do to reduce the unemployment rate, to move people out of long-term unemployment into work, would be to expand economic growth. And I think the way to do that is not by talking about inequality and demonizing folks at the top who are doing a lot of business investment. I think the way to do it is to try to get some consensus around things that would grow the economy, that would not be polarizing. I think we can agree on things like high-skilled immigration. I think we can agree on a deregulation agenda. I know that the chairman supports a consumption tax. I think that would be a very pro-growth reform to pursue. And inequality, I think, just it's divisive. It's essentially ensuring that nothing gets done. It's using a political issue to guarantee gridlock through the rest of the president's term, and sort of hoping that with small-size policies like unemployment insurance extension, a minimum wage, which I agree with my colleague Dr. Kearney that a modest minimum wage might not do any damage and might actually be helpful. A 40% increase to an unprecedented historical level, which is what 1010 would be. If there's some dispute about what the level was in 1968, depending on how you adjust for the cost of living, 1010 would be unprecedented, and the 40% increase would be something that we've not seen in a long time in a recovery that's sort of still fragile. I think it's just a terrible idea. We ought to stop using these divisive frames and agree on some consensus that everyone would agree would move the economy forward.
Thank you. Dr. Mathur?
Thank you. I would agree with Secretary Reich. You know, it is a demand problem. There are consumers out there who don't have the money to buy things, but I think the seed of all that is coming from joblessness. I mean, this is something that has happened over the course of the recession, that people are, don't have the money, and there doesn't exist enough demand. And I think a lot of it is coming from the fact that they have lost value in their homes, and they are out in the labor market, they don't have jobs, and they don't have the wages and the salary to earn enough income to be able to go out there and buy things. And I think, the current policies to extend, let's say, unemployment benefits, which are intended to help people, I think, the intentions are great. I think they are intended to help people who've been out of the labor market for so long that they have little hope of finding a job. I think we could do much more than simply extending cash assistance benefits for, 72 weeks or 99 weeks. I think after a worker has been unemployed for 4 to 5 months, they need active help in finding a job. And so coming up with a program that would actually match workers to jobs, either a wage subsidy program or, sort of skills training or just online searches, helping workers find jobs would be much more effective than simply, extending benefits. And what happens at the end of the 99 weeks when the worker is still unemployed?
Thank you. Dr. Kearney, I know my colleague from Minnesota wants to talk about the value of education and skills and climbing the economic ladder. Secretary Reich, you are so good to be here today. Let me ask you about the minimum wage. I come from a Chamber of Commerce background, so helping create small businesses and build a business community. And I know, when you force a small business with 10 workers to pay $5,000 more a worker each year, no change in productivity, no new customers, just $50,000. It may be, in fact, the whole profit for the year. That not only does it discourage new hiring, often leads to cutting workers' hours. And I noticed, too, that forced in that situation, small businesses will look to new workers, young workers. They're more likely to hire those who have had the advantages of a middle-class family and education and a work ethic and all that goes with sort of creating advantages. They're less likely to take chances on a younger worker from a poor community, that perhaps hasn't had those chances. So we, in effect, my view, not only do we make small businesses make terrible decisions on hours for the workers, make it tough for them to survive, but I really think we remove the lowest rung of the ladder for especially young minority people. So my question to you is, as you look at income inequality, have the years that have raised the minimum wage, has that lowered income inequality? In raising minimum wage over the number of years, has that changed it, decreased it, shrunk it?
Mr. Chairman, one of the last times I testified before this committee was in 1995, and the subject was, do we raise the minimum wage? Many members of the committee, particularly Republican members, but not exclusively, were concerned about raising the minimum wage because they were concerned about its negative effect on job growth. At that time, I presented evidence that a raise in the minimum wage, not a gigantic raise, but a substantial raise, would actually help job growth in terms of creating, as I talked about before, more money in the hands of people who could turn around and buy stuff and thereby have a positive multiplier effect. Now, we did an experiment.
I don't want to interrupt, but specifically to the issue of income inequality. Has raising the minimum wage shrunk the difference between the earnings?
Well, I was just about to get to the point, Mr. Chairman. In the short term, what we discovered is that raising the minimum wage actually was correlated in 1996, 1997, 1998, 1999 with increases in employment, not decreases. But in the larger in the larger time horizon, we have not raised the minimum wage. The minimum wage is still 30% now below what it was in 1968. Had we merely maintained the 1968 minimum wage adjusted for inflation, it would be today substantially above $10 an hour. So the answer to your question, larger scale answer to your question, is that we have not, in inflation-adjusted terms, since 1968, really raised the minimum wage. In fact, the decline of the minimum wage has contributed to widening inequality, particularly among women, because most minimum wage workers are women. If we raise the minimum wage, we would get about 4.6 million people, conservative estimate, out of poverty.
Okay.
It just seems to me, if I just a quick response, just seems to me, you know, our focus shouldn't be on raising the minimum wage. It should be getting people off it in education and skills and jobs, better jobs, how we do it.
Okay. Just